Welcome, this is Cheating Facts. Tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to manipulate you into covering for their mistakes? Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who betray us deepest. It's incredible how far some people will go to protect their secrets. My name is Trevor, and 3 years ago, I was a senior account manager at a mid-sized marketing firm in Denver. I'd been with the company for 8 years, worked my way up from an entry-level position, and had what I thought was a solid relationship with my boss, Richard Kelman. He was in his late 40s, married with 2 teenage kids, and had always been professional with me. That's why what happened next caught me completely off guard. It started during a business conference in Chicago. Richard and I were there to meet with potential clients, and we'd booked rooms at the same hotel. The first day went smoothly. We had productive meetings, closed 2 deals, and Richard seemed pleased with how things were going. On the second night, I realized I'd left some important contract documents in Richard's room. We'd been reviewing them together earlier, and in the rush to get to dinner, I'd forgotten to take my copies. It was around 10 p.m. when I decided to go get them. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer. I could hear voices inside, though, so I knocked again, louder this time. The door opened, and standing there was a woman I'd never seen before. She was maybe 35, blonde, wearing a hotel bathrobe, and she looked panicked when she saw me. Behind her, I could see Richard scrambling to put on his shirt. "Trevor," he said, his face red with embarrassment. "This isn't. The woman, who I later learned was named Vivian Torres, quickly composed herself. She smiled at me, but there was something calculating in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. "You must be Trevor," she said. "Richard's told me so much about you." I stood there for a moment, processing what I was seeing. My married boss, who talked about his wife and kids constantly, was obviously having an affair. I felt awkward and just wanted to get out of there. "I just need those contracts we were looking at," I said quietly. Richard grabbed the papers from the desk and handed them to me. "Trevor, I hope you understand. This is complicated." I nodded and left without saying anything else. I'm not a judgmental person, and honestly, Richard's personal life was none of my business. I figured I'd just pretend it never happened and move on. But Vivian had other plans. The next morning at breakfast, she approached my table while Richard was on a phone call with his wife. "I need to talk to you," she said, sitting down without being invited. "Look, what you and Richard do is between you two." I started, but she cut me off. "It's not that simple. Richard's been helping me with some financial difficulties. His company has been paying consulting fees to my LLC for marketing services." I frowned. I handled most of our vendor relationships, and I'd never heard of any consulting arrangement with someone named Vivian Torres. "What kind of consulting?" I asked. She looked nervous. "Social media strategy, market research, things like that. But the payments, they're not exactly being processed through normal channels." My stomach dropped. This sounded like embezzlement. "Richard's been authorizing payments to your company for services you're not actually providing." I asked. "We provide services," she said defensively. "Just not in the traditional sense." I realized she was talking about their relationship. Richard was essentially paying her with company money. "I can't be involved in this," I said, starting to stand up. She grabbed my arm. "You're already involved, Trevor. You know about us now. If this comes out, Richard's career is over. His marriage is over. And since you handle vendor payments, they'll assume you knew about the arrangement all along." I felt a chill run down my spine. She was right that I processed vendor payments, but I'd never seen anything from her company. "I've never approved any payments to you," I said. She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Are you sure about that?" That afternoon, I discreetly checked our payment records when we got back to Denver. What I found made me sick. Over the past 6 months, there were 12 payments totaling nearly $40,000 to something called VT Marketing Solutions. Each payment had been authorized with my digital signature. I immediately went to Richard's office. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. He looked up from his computer, and I could see the guilt written all over his face. "I know about the payments to VT Marketing," I said, "and I know those are my authorization signatures." Richard's shoulders sagged. "Trevor, I can explain. You forged my signature to steal company money and pay your mistress?" "It's not like that," he said desperately. "Vivian needed help, and I couldn't use my own authorization codes without raising red flags. I was going to tell you, but then it just got complicated." Complicated? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Richard, this is embezzlement. and fraud. And you made me an accessory. He stood up and walked to the window. No one has to know. Vivian's company can start providing actual services. We can make this legitimate going forward. What about the money that's already been paid? We'll figure something out. But I could see in his eyes that he had no intention of fixing this. He was hoping I'd just stay quiet and let it continue. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I decided to confront Vivian directly. I met her at a coffee shop near her apartment that evening. I thought I could reason with her. Maybe convince her to return the money and end this before it got worse. Richard told me about your conversation, she said as soon as I sat down. Then you know we need to fix this. The company could prosecute both of you. She leaned back in her chair and studied me. Or they could prosecute just you. What do you mean? Think about it, Trevor. Who has access to the payment system? Who could forge authorization signatures? Who handles vendor relationships? She paused. It's not Richard. All the evidence points to you. I felt my blood run cold. But I didn't do anything. Can you prove that? Because I have months of emails from your company email address discussing our consulting arrangement. I have text messages from your phone number. I have records of meetings we supposedly had. That's impossible. I never sent you any emails or texts. She pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. There was a text conversation between us, discussing payment schedules and project deliverables. The messages were coming from my phone number. How did you? It's amazing what you can do with technology these days, she said, especially when you have someone on the inside helping you. The realization hit me like a truck. Richard hadn't just forged my signature on the payments. He'd been setting me up from the beginning, creating fake communications, building a paper trail that made it look like I was the one stealing money to pay a fictitious consulting company. Why? I asked. Because Richard needs a fall guy. His wife's been asking questions about their finances. She hired a private investigator. If this comes out, he loses everything. His marriage, his kids, his job, his reputation. But if it's just an employee who got greedy and stole money, well, that's just bad hiring. I sat there in shock, trying to process what she was telling me. What do you want? I finally asked. Nothing from you. Just keep doing your job and keep your mouth shut. In a few months, maybe you make a mistake. Miss an important deadline. Give Richard a reason to let you go. You find a new job and everybody moves on with their lives. And if I don't? Her smile disappeared. Then tomorrow morning, Richard discovers evidence that his trusted account manager has been embezzling money. The police get involved. You get arrested. And by the time you convince anyone that you were framed, your life is already ruined. I left that meeting knowing I was trapped, but I underestimated how desperate they were to protect their secret. 2 days later, I was called into a meeting with Richard and HR. On the table was a folder full of printed emails, text messages, and payment records, all showing my supposed involvement in the embezzlement scheme. Trevor, Richard said, trying to look disappointed rather than guilty. We've discovered some irregularities in our vendor payments. But here's the thing they didn't know. I'd spent those 2 days documenting everything. I'd secretly recorded my conversation with Vivian at the coffee shop. I'd taken pictures of the forged signatures. I'd traced the fake emails back to their source. And I discovered something else. Vivian wasn't just Richard's mistress. She was his business partner. They'd been running this scam for over 2 years with other employees, using the same playbook. I was just the latest victim. When I presented all my evidence to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, the investigation that followed exposed a network of fraud that went far beyond just stolen consulting fees. Richard was arrested 3 weeks later. Vivian was charged as his co-conspirator. The company fired Richard and apologized to me. But the damage to my reputation in the industry was already done. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I just walked away that night in Chicago, if I'd never knocked on Richard's hotel room door. But then I remember all the other employees they'd framed over the years, all the lives they'd destroyed to cover their tracks. They thought they could manipulate me into being their next victim, but they picked the wrong person to frame. If you found this story shocking, make sure to subscribe for more true stories of workplace betrayal and revenge. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered something about your boss that changed everything? I read every comment, and your stories might be featured in future videos.